Order, order. The sitting's now resumed. I'll call Mr. David Amess.
Mrs. May, Southend and the sea enjoy a symbiotic relationship, of that there can be no doubt. And it gives us in Southend our character, our image, even our name. That's why we're called Southend-on-Sea. For many, both locals and tourists, the sea offers a chance for leisure, providing chances to enjoy our historic seafront, our pier represented by my honourable friend, the member for Rochford and Southend East, and the arcades, which are known as the Golden Mile, which Her Majesty the Queen had the privilege of driving past some years ago. But for others, the sea provides employment and opportunity. And that is really, Mrs. Main, the purpose of this debate. Nowhere is this more true than our historic fishing community in Leigh-on-Sea and in Old Leigh. Boats have been working the waters for centuries. Indeed, it was boats from the local fishing community that were used at Dunkirk to rescue injured people. So there is a long history of patriotic support in terms of the fishermen and the wider community. Always the utmost respect has been given for one of Mother Nature's most powerful forces. But now, Mrs. Main, this industry that has adapted and survived over the ages is facing its greatest ever challenge. This threat does not come from our old friend the sea. Instead, it comes from within our own ranks and threatens to strike at the heart of Britain's ancient fishing. Now, let me say immediately to my honourable friend, the Minister, there is no point any Member of Parliament having an adjournment debate for the sake of it, for press releases and for various people to observe. I always see a purpose in an adjournment debate, but I do entirely understand that my honourable friend, the Minister, will be constrained for all sorts of reasons, indeed considering potential matters which are pending in the court. So if my honourable friend is constrained by what is to be said in terms of the government's response, I would simply ask that he would reflect on what I'm going to share with him and perhaps consider in the fullness of time whether something can be done to help. Now, the Marine Management Organisation is, in its own words, supposed to make a significant contribution to the marine area. Yet, for many fishermen, it has become an increasingly vindictive organisation that is managed by people who have no practical knowledge of the industry they regulate. Astoundingly, Mrs. Main, only one member of the board and executive committee has any physical experience of fishing. One member. Now, that in itself, I would have thought, would be a cause for concern. Their implementation of law is, I believe, inconsistent and draconian, particularly in regards to small inshore fishing boats. And I refer to the 10-metre fleet, which is being subject to the harshest possible sentences for minor offences, which can be so extreme that some people find themselves receiving the same punishment as drug dealers and gang members. Certainly.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that part of the problem was created by the last government when they underestimated the catch of the under 10-metre fleet, and the quota available to this fleet is disproportionate compared to the larger vessels where most of the quota is held by producer organisations?
Let me say immediately how I welcome my honourable friend to this debate, because she has much more expertise in this particular sector than I have, and the fact that she has made her point in terms of what the last government were responsible for, I absolutely agree, and that's why I say to my honourable friend, I do understand that he is constrained at the moment by the regulations already in place. Certainly.
Once again, I congratulate you on steering a debate on this motion. It does alarm me, the points that you've raised about the proverbial sledgehammer used to crack the nut. And it's like sending in the SAS whenever a bailiff would do. And I think we do need to get back to common sense when it comes to regulatory matters on sea and off sea.
I'm going to call the honourable member my honourable friend, and I know I speak for everyone in wishing his father a rude return to health. He must have read my speech, because I've actually used that expression, a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Agree with him completely. So this issue is centred around what I believe is a complete misuse of the Proceeds of Crime Act. And worryingly, those who speak out against the MNO seems to be the ones who are dealt with most severely. Now, this is just totally unacceptable. And yes, I am going to personalise this, because I'm going to talk about a constituent. A constituent of mine, who I would regard as a friend, on Christmas Eve. Now, can you believe this court hearing was actually held on Christmas Eve, with all the stress that involved? And he was recently fined £400,000. I'll say this again to the House, £400,000. And apparently, I wasn't there to listen to the judges summing up, and I make no criticism of the judge at all, because he was just interpreting the law as it stands. But he apparently said that if it hadn't been for the references, the fine could have been as much as £600,000. And this fine is for bureaucratic offences relating to his catch, the majority of which concerned offences relating to sales notes. Gentleman I refer to is Paul Gibson. Like generations of his family before, he has fished the waters of Leon Sea since childhood. He is a highly respected member of the local community. Indeed, I remember in the late 90s, I went with him, the gentleman who was then running my office, Lionel Ortman, and the then Member of Parliament for Bob Spink, and we did battle with the very famous Fisheries Commissioner, Emma Bonino. And I think it was game, sat and match to the Paul Gilson contingent. He is the skipper of the historic boat, the Endeavour, and I'm delighted to tell the House the Endeavour boat will be travelling in the flotilla for Her Majesty's Diamond Jubilee. A seat has been reserved on the boat for my good self, but as I suffer from seasickness, I will be given the opportunity to someone else. However flat the River Thames is on that particular day, and I have to say to my honourable friend, unfortunately with me, pills don't work. My honourable, the gentleman I'm talking about, Paul Gilson, is so highly thought of in Southend, he was awarded the Freedom of the Borough, which I think says everything about him. He is an honest, hard-working man, and such a sentence, I believe, is an absolute outrage, especially given that the two other recent sales note offences received sentences of £3,500 or £6,000 respectively. So I know my honourable friend can't comment on it, and it's a matter whether or not it should have been appealed in terms of sentences. But how can two people be given a sentence of £3,500 and £6,000, and Mr. Gilson has been given a sentence of £400,000? This is absolutely not acceptable. And it is a coincidence, I have to say, Mrs. Main, that if you are a critic of the MNO, you seem to be dealt with particularly harshly. Now, I'm not denying that if an offence has been committed, then obviously a punishment should be bestowed. But as my honourable friend said earlier, this is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The punishment should fit the crime. The POCA, under the right circumstances, is an effective deterrent. But Paul Gilson is not a gangster. He's not a drug dealer. The judge even conceded that there was no evidence at all to suggest that Mr. Gilson had enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. Indeed, if he had been enjoying a lavish lifestyle, no doubt I would have expected myself to have benefited from it to an extent as a friend, or that he was in any sense motivated by greed. Absolutely not. There is clearly an abuse of the Proceeds of Crime Act by the MMO, and Paul Gilson is not the only example. Now, I know a number of colleagues have sent me briefings on this matter. And in particular, my honourable friend, the member for Harwich, he has 2 fishermen who will be before Colchester Magistrates Court on the 29th of February. I obviously won't go into the details because I know, as this is before the courts, my honourable friend, the Minister, can't comment on it. But apparently, in one similar case, a judge recommended a fine of £2,000, while the MMO pushed for a prosecution, again under the Proceeds of Crime Act, to the tune of £156,000. Now, this is just absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. A fisherman from an historic fishing town is being harassed at every opportunity, whilst 3 men from the Colchester area, as I said 2, 3 are about to appear in court charged with similar offences, and they fear for their livelihood. This is, I believe, Mrs. Main, vindictiveness beyond belief, and also a very serious waste of taxpayers' money. Because as we found out only too well with the Harry Redknapp trial, that was about £8 million spent on that. This is all coming out of the public purse. And money should not be wasted in criminal proceedings, I believe, unnecessarily. I think this is a waste of taxpayers' money. Now, departments are supposed to be making significant cuts. And I, again, would ask my honourable friend, the Minister, respectfully, to reflect on this, because I believe that money is being wasted in terms of the pursuit of small-scale fishermen, largely guilty of nothing more than omissions in paperwork. My goodness, if I was to be looked at in terms of the way some of my paperwork is dealt with, no doubt I would have something to be answerable for. So I have tremendous sympathy for Paul Gilson and the other small fishermen. But I think, Mrs. Main, the problems run deeper. The whole issue surrounding Mr. Gilson's case and others like him results from mismanagement within the industry and archaic impractical laws regarding quota, which my honourable friend has brought to the attention of the House. I've been reliably informed that fishermen are losing out on their catch, fish is being left uncaught, but is not being replenished in the quotas for the next year. For example, Dover sole and skate in the North Sea are being undercaught by hundreds of tonnes. Indeed, there is an inconsistent implementation of quotas within the industry itself. Now, 2 excellent articles appeared in the Times on the 14th of February. I refer to one called Historic Fishing Town Can't Catch Its Own Cod, and I refer to my honourable friend, the Minister, the circumstances of the Hastings fishing fleet. And then another article appeared regarding the cartel on fishing quotas. And my honourable friend, the member for the Vale of York, said it was astounding that the government did not know who actually owned the quotas it handed out. And that is what the chairman of the Select Committee said. And also my honourable friend, the member for Waveney, described it as an absolute scandal, because the current system of quota allocation has resulted in fishermen with boats of less than 10 metres being denied access to the seas. They comprise 85% of the United Kingdom fleet, yet receive only 4% of the annual quota. So they're 85% of the fleet, and they receive 4% of the annual quota. This just can't be acceptable. If owners of smaller boats want to share the quota, they usually have to rent it, but many cannot afford the price demanding. So I believe, Mrs. Main, the small boat owners claim rightly that this system forces them to discard tonnes of fish. Government figures suggest that larger boats are fishing less than a third of their quota and renting over half to smaller vessels. This leaves up to a fifth of quotas left uncaught. Why aren't these stocks passed on to the struggling under 10s, or at least replenished in the pot? This system, I believe, forces smaller boat owners to discard tonnes of fish in order to comply with their regulations. Such a practice is ludicrous and wasteful. I read recently about the privatisation of the seas, whereby private producer organisations manipulate the market to boost their profits, despite being given 90% of the quotas for free. These producer organisations are on the verge of securing personal control of Britain's fishing rights. Worryingly, it's been confirmed that the government does not know, as I've already said, who is profiting from this arrangement, an admission echoed by the MMO. This quota cartel hits the 10-metre boats particularly hard, as I've already mentioned. And it leaves men and women struggling to make a living. It is well to remember that these are fishermen, not bureaucrats, and it is madness that they spend as much time doing paperwork as they actually do fishing. All of this, Mrs. Main, is killing our historic fishing industry, overseen by apparently vindictive organisation who have no experience or understanding of the industry. Fishermen are rapidly, quite rightly, losing faith in the MMO. Add on top of this the absurd restrictive laws that surround quotas and the anonymous cartel that manipulates the markets for its own gain, it is easy to see the terrible state the under 10-metre fishing industry finds itself in. So, Mrs. Main, I believe fishing is an art as old as man itself. It has survived everything that Mother Nature can throw at it. But it seems that it might just be defeated by our own ludicrous legislation and pointless policy making. Something has to be done, not only to help my constituent Paul Gilson, but the constituents of all members present and those in the rest of the House.